All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We're glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Arthur Ortiz. I'm Chief Strategic Partnerships and Community Engagement Officer here at the University of St. Thomas, and we're so happy for you to join us today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Ben Nguyen, who will be tonight's speaker. Dr. Ben Nguyen is both a canon lawyer and a civil lawyer. He currently serves as the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students here at the University of St. Thomas. Formerly, Dr. Nguyen served as the Chancellor for the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin, and subsequently as Chancellor for Diocese of Corpus Christi, where he was also the Canonical Counsel and Theological Advisor to the Bishop and the Promoter of Justice in the Diocesan Tribunal. For over 20 years, he has served in several diocesan chanceries in roles such as Chancellor, Director of Communications, Defender of the Bond, and Director of Sacred Worship. He continues to be a canonical investigator and canonical consultant to numerous bishops, dioceses, and Catholic institutions across the United States. Dr. Nguyen holds a bachelor's degree in liturgical musicology from the University of Kansas, go Jayhawks, and a Master of Theological Studies degree from the University of Dallas, a pontifical licentiate degree in canon law from the Catholic University of America, a Juris Doctorate Law degree from Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota, and is completing a doctoral degree in Scripture at the Neuchâtel, am I pronouncing that correctly? Yes, Neuchâtel, Neuchâtel House Theological Seminary in Delafield, Wisconsin, as well as a Doctor of Education from the University of St. Thomas. In academics, Ben served as an administrator, upper school dean, and teacher at a K-12 school in Wisconsin. For several years, he served as an administrator and assistant professor in the Graduate Institute for Pastoral Theology at Ave Maria University. He has taught at Mundelein Seminary in Chicago, including the Liturgical Institute, and he continues to teach as an adjunct professor of canon law for St. Mary's Seminary here in Houston. In canonical practice, Ben specializes in chancery and parish administrative law, as well as in the area of canonical penal law, especially clergy misconduct and grave delicts against the faith. He serves on the Board of Governors and several committees for the Canon Law Society of America. He and his wife Beth have been married for 29 years and have 5 children and 6 happy grandchildren. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Benedict Nguyen.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for giving me an introduction that I wish my mother were here to see. So, let's begin, as we do with all things, with a word of prayer. I thought that we'd begin with the prayer for the election of a pope that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops had put out. So if you can join me in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Together, O God, eternal shepherd, who govern your flock with unfailing care, grant in the boundless fatherly love a pastor for your church, who will please you by his holiness, and to us show watchful care through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever. Amen. St. Peter, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, welcome everybody to this lecture that we kind of threw together pretty quickly because although we knew things were coming, we never quite know when it comes. So I want to thank the organizational committee. We have a papal transition committee that we put together here at UST. Got a lot of great stuff planned for the next few weeks here, right in the midst of finishing up the semester and finals and all that great stuff as well. So there's a lot of great energy going on. There's a lot of stuff going on campus tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to give a great word of welcome to those also who are joining us on the live stream. tonight. Thanks for those who have set it up, Brenda and John and team there. Thank you guys so much for everything. We are in such an amazing moment in history. Whenever you have the passing of a pope and then the election of a pope, we're talking about history. For most of us, this doesn't happen very often. For most of us, it's only a handful of times that we're going to witness this in our lifetime, although the church has been at this for 2,000 years now, which means that we're stepping into the stream of history, the stream of what the church is laying out in her maternal care. It's an emotional time. It's a very tense time in some ways. It's a time that we look back, a way that we look forward. It's an amazing time to be alive. So what I'd like to do tonight is to consider a few things as we go through this. And through the next few weeks or so, I'm sure we're going to hear all kinds of things in the news, all kinds of opinions, all the pundits come out, the talking heads come out, and things like that. What I'd like to do tonight is to cut through a lot of that and go back to see what the church lays out, so that as we're looking at this drama, this history that's kind of unfolding in front of us, we kind of know where we are. It's going to be a lot of information. Don't worry, you don't catch everything. There's going to be a lot of things that we want to unpack. I want to just lay it out there. The live stream, I think, is being recorded, so you can always go back and watch that later. If there's something that interests you, you can always Google it and look it up a little bit later. We're going to talk about some personalities. We're going to talk about roles. We're going to talk about theology. We're going to talk about sociology. We're going to talk about a lot of things that are of great interest in this time. What I'd like to do is to start with a consideration of the question. The first question is, why do we have ceremonies? Why do we have rituals? There's a journalist, a Jewish journalist. His name is George Seldes. And he wrote a book on the Vatican several years ago. And he observed, while other men die in darkness and confusion and amidst tears, the Pope dies in ceremony. What a great observation. Why is it that a Pope dies in ceremony? Why is it that the church lays out rituals, protocols, things that we do over and over throughout the centuries for this? Is it, as some people say, just trappings of the office? Is it, as some people would say, just stodgy traditions that we need to get beyond? I would submit that there's something much more. And so let's lay some foundations, because a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about later on, about the protocols and things like that, aren't going to make a lot of sense unless we start laying the foundation first. The first foundation is this question of why have ritual? Why have ceremonies? Well, I would submit a few things here. That ceremony, ritual, celebrates humanity. As a matter of fact, one of our former popes, Pope Benedict XVI, observed that in his wonderful book, The Spirit of the Liturgy. He speaks about within the human person, it seems like we're hardwired for ceremonial things. From the way we get married, to the way we bring children into the world, to, of course, the way that we bury our loved ones. We express things ritually. We express things ceremonially. Why is that? Why is that? And he submits that there's something in the human condition. Us being both spirit and physical, our spiritual side a lot of times wants to express itself in outward manifestations. And our rituals, our ceremonies, help us to express those interior spiritual truths. That's part of why the church lays out these beautiful ceremonies, particularly for something like the death and passing of the Pope. Ceremonies, rituals, bind us also in unity. Even in those who think that they're not ritualistic, if you will. When we go to sports events, there's a ritual that goes on. When we celebrate birthdays, there's a little bit of a ritual that goes on. When we propose, when we get married, when we do these things that are grand moments in time, we tend, as humans, to express those ritually. It binds us not only to each other in unity, it binds us also in space and in time. These rituals that we see the church laying out for the passing and election of a pope, some of these have been done for centuries upon centuries. It unites us to that family of the church that cuts across time and space. The communio of the church, linking us with popes of the past and faithful of the past. Yes, sometimes it's a little bit different, and these things grow and things like that, but it binds us in that communio and in that faith. Ritual, ceremonies also express to us a respect. A respect for the things that's being considered, the things that are being offered, but also a respect for the persons involved. Yes, we do respect somebody who God has called to be our Holy Father, who God has called to be our spiritual fathers for so many years. It's a respect also for the office. Because we know when it comes to the papacy, we've had some real scoundrels before. We've had some real saints before. The office remains. The office of the papacy is a gift that Jesus Christ left us, starting with Matthew 16:18 and going on. The church, however, has been around for a while. The church also lays these things out for a bit of utility as well. There's a practical reason why we do this, because the church knows that in a time of transition, in a time particularly of transition of leadership, that can be a lot of confusion. That can be a lot of tension. That can be a lot of uncertainty. And yes, unfortunately, given fallen human nature, that can also be a time when some take advantage, some push and pull. It gets very political. We all have interests and things like that. And the church says, let's protect the faithful during this time. So those types of ceremonies, those types of things are also designed to make things very strict. Why? Because we don't want people to take advantage of the situation. We want a smooth, beautiful transition that's grace-filled, that's spiritual, that's hopeful. That's why the church lays out these wonderful histories. So let's start diving in a little bit with that foundation. The proper term that we use for this period is a sede vacante. A sede vacante, a wonderful a Latin term. It's in various forms there. As a matter of fact, if you go on the Vatican website, that's what you'll see. Apostolica sedes vacans. It's just a different form of the same word. It means an empty seat, an empty chair. What chair? The chair of St. Peter. The authority, the office is empty. And we feel that lack. We feel that lack a bit. In the church, we have this wonderful notion of the chair, the sitting. We can go on and on about that, getting its roots all the way back from the seat of Moses. And then we see Jesus Christ sitting down at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, symbolizing his authority as well. And we always joke that in the Catholic Church, we even have furniture feasts, such as the chair of St. Peter, the feast of the chair, the feast of a furniture. Why would we have a furniture feast? Because it shows us so much more. When the chair is empty, we feel the lack. And I would submit, when the chair is empty, the world feels the lack. I was talking to my daughter on the way to school this morning, and our conversation she said, it just seems like people are just kind of going nuts with interest in the church all of a sudden. People who are not religious all of a sudden have a lot of interest in what's going on in the church. It's because the papacy still matters, because the church still matters, because that emptiness, I think, is felt not only within the Catholic Church, but outside the church as well. So the sede vacante is the term that you'll see a lot. Sede vacante is empty seat, empty seat. What I'd like to do is I'd like to divide up tonight into 3 sections. Part 1, I'd like to look at and continue to lay the foundation, because it's really hard to understand this if we don't get the cast of characters down a little bit. There's a lot of positions, and the church is very strict who gets to do what, because again, the church doesn't want anybody to take advantage of the situation. So this position will do this position will do that. So we'll look at the positions and some of the players here. Then, in part 2, we'll look at what happens during the death of a pope, which we're kind of going, it's kind of live time right now, because daily feasts are coming out of Rome. A lot of things have already happened. We'll unpack some of that, and then we'll turn our attention to the conclave, how that functions, and how that works. So, a tall order, let's dive right into it. Let's start with this. Key persons. Trick question. Of course, when you say trick question, people already know that it's the trick question, but trick question. What is the highest order in the Catholic Church? What is the highest order in the Catholic Church? You don't have to raise your hand or anything like that. I actually heard the answer already. Kudos. Yes, the highest order in the church actually is bishop. The bishop is the highest order. Well, people are probably thinking, well, what about a cardinal? What about an archbishop? What about a pope? Aren't those higher orders? And the answer is technically no. Technically no, because Jesus Christ came and he ordained bishops. Apostles, his apostle, the word apostle means he who is sent. Somebody who is sent. And so he sends the 12, and then there are successors to those apostles. So the bishops are the highest order, if you will. All the other positions, archbishop, cardinal, even pope, are certain kinds of bishops. An archbishop is a bishop who's placed over an archdiocese. What's an archdiocese? We Roman Catholics love to base a lot of our functioning on ancient Roman law. The way we divide ourselves geographically is according to ancient Roman law. A parish, we've heard of a parish. We've heard of a deanery. We've heard of a diocese, an archdiocese, a region, a province. Those are all ancient Roman law divisions that we adopted. And so in this notion of an archdiocese, it's a grouping of a bunch of dioceses into what we call a province, an ecclesiastical province. Everything's bigger in Texas, so we said we're going to have 2 archdioceses here. So we have 2, the Archdiocese of San Antonio and the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, right here. We are in an archdiocese. Each one of those have several what we call suffragan dioceses that are associated with those. And so the head bishop of the archdiocese is an archbishop, but he's a bishop. He just has certain other duties with an archdiocese that's there. So what about the Pope? The Pope is the guy who is the successor of the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome, Peter goes to Rome, establishes the community there, dies there, gets executed in what is now the Vatican. His successor is what we call Papa, the Pope. The first among equals, and all these other titles we've given to the Pope in order to flesh out his service and his ministry to us. So the Pope is a bishop. The Pope has certain charisms that we believe he has. One is what we call universal jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction, he has the administrative powers over the entire church because he's the successor of Peter, the first among equals. We also say that he has the charism of infallibility, and we can do a whole talk on infallibility as well, but that means that in very limited certain circumstances, the Holy Spirit protects him when he's teaching on faith and morals, intending it to be so, that he is protected from error. Why? Because the gates of hell shall not prevail against you. I will give you the keys of the kingdom. What you hold bound on earth shall be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth shall be loose in heaven. Matthew 16:18 through 19. So the Pope is the successor of Peter. Pope Francis is the 266th successor of Peter. So he's the 266th Pope. It's funny, Arthur and I were talking, and he kept saying, which I love, Arthur, this is fantastic. He said, wow, when they elect 267, I'm like, hey, we got to get a t-shirt with that on. Let's put 267, waiting for 267 or something like that. So the Pope, successor of Peter, but he's a bishop. He's the Bishop of Rome. Okay? He's Bishop of Rome. So what about these cardinals? What about these cardinals? Cardinals are bishops. Cardinals are also bishops. Cardinals have a unique task, some different duties as a bishop, however. The word cardinal comes from this notion of cardo in Latin, which means a pivot, a hinge, like a door hinge is a cardo cordis. It's pivot because the church pivots on their service on here. What do? They're consultants to the Pope. They're assistants to the Pope. And so the papacy, because it's overwhelming and there's a lot to oversee, he utilizes these cardinals in order to assist him in serving the church. They are also called to be witnesses. In Greek, the word witness is martyrion. Yeah, that's where we get the word martyr from. They're called to give witness. That's why cardinals wear red. Because it's the color of blood, they have to be willing to die for the faith. They have to be willing to stand up for the faith and to shed blood for the faith. By the way, that's also why popes wear red shoes. Not all of them, it's not required, but when they wear red shoes, the idea of a red shoe on a pope is not a trapping of an office. The idea of a red shoe on a pope is that you're willing to stand in the pool of your own blood for the faith. That's what the red shoe is for. It's not a fashion statement. Why wear white with red shoes? It's kind of a silly fashion statement, but a statement of faith. a statement of martyrion, a statement of willing to die. So that's why when you see the cardinals, you're going to see a lot of red, which is great. That's also our school color here. So you're going to see a lot of red on this tonight. So when I had somebody help me earlier putting this together, she said, what color do you want? I was like, red. You got to do the red there. So we're going to do a lot of red. The main function of a cardinal, though, is to elect the next pope. They're the guys who are responsible for electing the next pope. And the way that it's phrased in canon law, in canon 350 or right around there, is that they have to do it according to special law. According to special law. What's the special law? In 1996, Pope John Paul II gathered these customs and traditions that we've been using for a while and reformed how we elect popes. He came out with a document called Universi Dominici Gregis. Universi Dominici Gregis. You'll see it not the italics, but the letters for it. UDG. A lot of times when you read along, you see UDG. That's Universi Dominici Gregis. The whole flock of the Lord is what it means. Latin documents and documents in the church use the first few Latin phrases for their titles. That's where we get it from. That's the rules for the conclave. Pope Benedict came along and tweaked two things, very small things. And we'll talk about one of those a little bit later on. Pope Francis came along and he tweaked a few of the ceremonial things. But other than that, UDG is the document. So as you're going through and you're watching all this unfold, and you see people, can they do this or who does that? More than likely, it's in UDG. It's in the Universi Dominici Gregis. That's the special law that the Pope lays out. What's the qualification for a cardinal? Has to be at least a priest. He has to be outstanding in doctrine, morals, piety, and prudence. That's canon 351 in the Code of Canon Law. Outstanding in those things. If he's not already a bishop, he needs to be ordained as a bishop. There's a few exceptions throughout the years, but mostly so. He's appointed by the Pope, and usually it's a public appointment, what's called a consistory of cardinals, and then the hat is given and things like that. But there's also this provision called in pectore, in the chest, which is, for some reason, the Pope doesn't want to make it public. It could be that he's from a war-torn area, that there's a tough political situation or something like that. And yes, I know what you're all thinking, and I'm trying to resist reference to a certain movie that came out very recently. We can spend all night with that. All my UST students, please, 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 never let me catch you getting your theology from Hollywood. Please do not let me do that. So I will hunt you down. So anyway, in pectore is a secret cardinal, a cardinal that is there. And again, don't get me going because there's a lot of inaccuracies there in the movie. Cardinals, just like all bishops, have to submit their resignation when they hit 75. Now, here's the thing. They can't stop until the Pope accepts that. So they have to submit it, but if the Pope doesn't accept it, sorry, you keep working. And you keep going, and you keep going. Cardinal Ratzinger submitted his resignation to John Paul II 3 times, and John Paul would not accept it. And he had to keep going. So that's the case with all bishops, and so cardinals the same way. The difference is that according to UDG, cardinals can vote in the conclave until they hit 80. Until they hit 80. Once they hit 80, they can't serve anymore. They can't serve in the sense that they can't vote in the conclave. Now, of course, this is how the church wants to be very exact. The church doesn't want people having to guess. When do you have to hit 80? What if somebody hits 80 after the Pope has died, but the conclave hasn't started? UDG is very clear. The day before the death of a Pope is the cutoff date. So Pope Francis died just last Monday, April, 21st? 2025, so April 20th is the cutoff date. Any cardinal who was not 80 by last Sunday, Easter Sunday, is eligible to vote, even if he turns 80 in the next couple weeks here. While the conclave is going on, he still can get in. So that's the cutoff there. So again, very exact. A couple statistics that I think are kind of fun. Currently, there are 252 cardinals. Okay, the Pope selects and the Pope can appoint them. How many can vote? 135 are under 80 as of April 20th, 2025. Now here's the pickle. Here's something to watch as things unfold a little bit. According to UDG, the special law of the church, the number of cardinal electors is set at 120. This is one of the first times in history where we had this conundrum. Now, it's been a practice. Every pope has done it. We want to appoint a few more cardinals because a few are probably going to die, a few are going to retire, they're going to term out and age out and things like that. So they always appointed more. Every time in history, it's always been that by the time the conclave rolled around, it was 120 or less. So Francis, doing the same thing, appointed a few more, and he passes away. What's the church going to do? I have no idea. We're going to see how the church plays this out a little bit. My guess is that that's one of the things that the general congregation is going to have to pick that up, and we'll talk about that. But it's a situation where we haven't had this yet in history. 135 cardinals, where the special law clearly says only 120 can vote. So let's see. Stay tuned. American cardinals. We have 17 American cardinals right now, not counting the nuncio and somebody who's not strictly American. 10 of them are eligible to vote. The other ones are over 80. Okay, so very interesting to play out. Our own Cardinal Donardo, who's going to come to our gala now, is skipping our gala for this conclave thing. And, we'll give him a pass. We'll give him a pass. There are also, yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. He hit 75 last year, so he's 76 right now. So he's still 4 years good. Yep. So he's going to Rome. As a matter of fact, if he's not over there already. So. Yeah, he's retired from the active ministry, but he's under 80, so he can vote. Yep, so he can vote. So cardinals also are given what's called titular sees. Titular sees are kind of a fun thing. Titular sees are quote-unquote dioceses, little dioceses that don't really exist. They're title only, hence the name titular. So every cardinal, no matter what their assignment is, even if they have a diocese, they're given a titular see as an honorific thing. Some of these titular sees don't exist. It's a geography thing. Some of these titular sees are just one church in Rome. Most of them are just one church in Rome. So, for example, I looked it up. Cardinal Donardo's titular see is the church of San Eusebio, St. Eusebius in Rome. That's his titular see. It's one building. And so he goes over there and he visits that, and every cardinal is given one of these titular sees. Now, I missed a slide before we get to the important positions there. There are 3 levels of cardinal. When I was in canon law school, and I don't know if this was your case too, Father, you can tell the nerds by the guys who knew the 3 ranks of cardinals and the 3 ranks of monsignors. There's 3 ranks to each one of those. Okay? So, did you know that cardinals come in 3 ranks? So cardinals, the first one is what they call cardinal bishops, the episcopal rank. Traditionally, there were only 7 of those in traditional, what they call suburbicarian sees. Oh, I love the terminology. Suburbicarian sees, the suburbs of Rome. So like Ostia, Palestrina, the places like that around Rome, traditionally were these places where these cardinals would have. So if you were made a bishop of one of those, you get that as a titular see, you're a cardinal bishop. Pope Francis, who likes to mix things up a bit, came and added several more. We now have 14 cardinal bishops. Before we only had 7, so now it's doubled, 2 of whom are Eastern rites. One's a Maronite and one's a Chaldean rite as well. Very interesting time that we live in. Perfectly fine, Pope can do that. The second order, if the first one is the cardinal bishops, the second one is cardinal priests. Cardinal priests, and of course the third one then, cardinal deacons. Okay, why the division? The division has nothing to do with function, things like that. It has everything to do with history. These are traditionally the places that was overseen by a cardinal deacon, cardinal priest. It's that simple. Okay? They're titular sees. Why do I bring this up? Not just to improve your trivia skills, but really it starts to come to play a little bit later on when you have certain positions, like the senior proto-cardinal deacon is going to have some tasks. The head guy of the cardinal bishops are going to have some tasks. That's how these norms start to divide it out. So really, really fascinating. Other important positions before we get into some of the specific law here. This is a guy that you're probably going to see a lot of. This guy is Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re. He's the dean of the College of Cardinals. What does that mean? That means that he's the one that's responsible for organizing the body of cardinals. He's the one that has to preside over the cardinals when they gather, because it's 252 of them coming in, so he has to kind of preside. Now, Cardinal Re is 91 years old. Okay, so well over the voting age, which means he can't go into the conclave. Interesting thing is that the dean of the College of Cardinals has a few things to do, but because he can't go into the conclave, there's provisions that have to be done. This is fascinatingly complex. Okay, he has to live in Rome. He's the one that traditionally notifies everybody of the death of the Pope. Okay, so when the Pope dies, the dean of the College of Cardinals is the one that notifies everyone. Once it's been confirmed, he notifies all the groups. Now, the interesting thing is that he didn't do that this time because he's 91. So the Camerlengo, and we'll talk about the Camerlengo, was the one that picked that up and took on that duty there. Okay. Next interesting position that we need to know for this process also is a guy called the Subdean of the College of Cardinals. He's the one that's the assistant to Cardinal Ray. So a lot of things, because Cardinal Ray, 91, I don't know if he's going to be able to do a lot of this. He's not in the conclave also because he's over 80. Some of this is going to devolve back down to Cardinal Sandri, who's going to be picking up some of those. So if you see him, he's probably filling in for Cardinal Ray. A guy that is really, really important in this process is the Cardinal Camerlengo. Cardinal Camerlengo. Okay, and where's Ray Fiennes? He's going to jump out here at me or something like that. That's the position Ray Fiennes had in the movie, which I said I was not going to reference, but I did. The Camerlengo is just another word for chamberlain. Chamberlain. In English, it would be the chamberlain. The chamberlain, the Camerlengo, has some real specific duties during the whole process of death and conclave. First one, he has to be designated by the Pope, so he can do it. When the Pope dies, the Camerlengo is the one that manages the finance of the Vatican, of the Roman Curia on there. Really interesting. I saw one of the news outlets, one of the national news outlets said, Cardinal Farrow now is running the church. No, not really. He's the one that's signing off on the bills. He's the one that's making sure the electricity gets paid. He's the one that makes sure everybody gets paid and their paychecks are issued. That's the type of stuff that he has to do. That day-to-day financial administrative stuff has to be done by him. He overlooks the properties of the Vatican as well. He's going to have several other things, so keep this in mind. By the way, Cardinal Farrow is an American cardinal. He's Irish by birth, but he was the Bishop of Dallas before he was over to Rome, and then was made the Camerlengo after that. So keep an eye on him. He's going to appear here in a second again. Next guy we should know is the Cardinal Protodeacon. The Cardinal Protodeacon. Who's the Protodeacon? Remember, there are 3 orders to cardinals. The Cardinal Bishop, Cardinal Priest, Cardinal Deacons. The senior in appointment of the order of Cardinal Deacons is the Cardinal Proto, the first deacon. Okay, he has several things. This is Cardinal Renato Martino. He also is 91 years old. So, what are we going to do? We're going to have to look at the next guy, this Frenchman called Cardinal Mamberti. Cardinal Mamberti is the prefect of the dicastery of the Apostolic Signatura, the highest canonical court in the church, the ones that take the appeals cases and things like that. Mamberti is the number 2. So he's not the proto-deacon, but he's the next senior one, because, again, Martino's not going to be able to participate. He's over 80. Why is this position important? Because he's the guy that makes the announcement of the new pope. When there's a new pope, whenever that's going to be, and they go out onto the loggia, onto the balcony, the guy that comes out and announces that's going to be Cardinal Mamberti. Okay, it's usually the Cardinal Protodeacon, but because I think Martino is quite elderly and he can't participate, then it goes to the next guy, which is Mamberti. So a real honor. This is set so that there's no jockeying for who gets to announce the new pope. It's the Cardinal Protodeacon or his assistant. Okay. All right, a couple of other things, a couple of other quick ones. We don't need to go too much into it. That's also very important. The first one is the Vicar for Rome. What's a vicar for Rome? The vicar for Rome is the guy that administers the Diocese of Rome on behalf of the Pope. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome, but he doesn't have time because he's trying to run the church. So he has to have a vicar, a guy who's running the Diocese of Rome on his behalf. That's the Vicar of Rome. Okay. He assists also in some of this process. Okay. Then the other guy to know, I didn't get a picture of him, is Cardinal Pietro Parolin. He's the Secretary of State. Secretary of State. Now remember, the Vatican, aside from being the head of the Catholic Church, is also a political city-state. So, just like the United States and other countries, they have a Secretary of State who functions in very similar ways. He's the one responsible for interaction with other sovereign nations and those types of things. Reason I bring this up, also, he doesn't have too big of a thing to play. A lot of people are seeing Parolin as a front runner for a possible pope, because several times in recent history, secretaries of state have been elected as pope. So somebody to keep an eye on, because he's very well connected and a lot of people know him, he's out there, things like that. So a lot of people are wondering, could it be Parolin? Who knows? Who knows? But that's the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is given a number 2, a guy named a sostituto, which really just means the substitute. Okay, the sostituto, is the chief of staff of the Roman Curia. So he's kind of like the chief of staff. So again, it's a political organization as well. So you have chief of staff just like you do with other countries. That's Archbishop Edgar Peña Parra right now is the sostituto. Okay. The other one that's not on there that does come to play also is the Master of Ceremonies, the Papal Master of Ceremonies. He's going to be in there once we look at the process. Master of Ceremonies is going to play a big role. Okay. All right. So with that, now we have the players. Let's start moving into some nitty-gritties here. Who is it that governs the church during the Sede vacante? The answer, it is not the Camerlengo. The answer is the College of Cardinals. As a body, governs the church. The College of Cardinals, as a body, has to make the decisions. The College of Cardinals are the ones that have to step up to run the church and keep the church going, protect the faithful, all those great things, while getting into the process of electing a new pope. The College of Cardinals, they do it in 2 ways. One is what's called a general congregation. The other is what's called a particular congregation. The general congregation is when they get together and they decide on the big things. The big things. As a matter of fact, once the Pope died on Monday, the Dean of the College of Cardinals called them immediately. By Tuesday, they had their first general congregation. First thing they did was start to make provisions. When's the funeral going to be? When's the laying in state? So they went through UDG, and they went through all the protocols to make sure and start making decisions. How are we going to do this? A lot of the practical things. They function by majority vote during a Sede vacante. So in other words, when's the funeral? Well, by majority vote, we decided on here. So as a body, they function as that. So there's going to be several general congregations that are going to happen leading up to the conclave. So when you hear them talk on the news about a general congregation, that's what they're talking about. They're making the big decisions there and deciding on the more serious matters. The other way that they function is in what's called a particular congregation. Particular congregation is a smaller group of cardinals. As a matter of fact, just 4 of them. The Camerlengo is the head, and then 1 representative from each one of the orders, the cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, cardinal deacons. The 4 of them get together, and they handle routine matters. Getting the bills paid. That's why the Camerlengo is part of it, because it's the day-to-day operations that's going on. Now, lest we have a runaway general congregation or a runaway group of cardinals, the principle that's laid down in canon law is sede vacante nihil innovator. When the see is vacant, nothing is to be innovated. In other words, you cannot now function as the Pope. You're not the Pope. You cannot innovate. You can't just build, you can't just create a new diocese. You can't make these decisions that only the Pope can do. As a matter of fact, what's also related to this is that you can't act in a way that, quote, prejudices the rights of the next Pope. It's very similar in a situation in a diocesan Sede vacante when you have a bishop move or a bishop dies or something like that, and you're waiting for the appointment of the next bishop. Sede vacante nihil innovator. You cannot get into things. You can't open new investments all of a sudden. You can't go out and buy a lot of property, things like that. You cannot prejudice the rights of the next guy. Your job is to hold the line. So the congregation, the general congregation knows this. That's why it's by majority vote and things like that. They don't want to risk things being invalidated and stuff like that. So their job is not to rule as if they're Pope only as a body. Their job is to hold the line, to make sure we get to the conclave and that the church can run, not that the church gets into new things. So, sede vacante nihil innovator is a great phrase. All right, nitty-gritty. Let's go into it. The death of a pope. The death of a pope. What happens when the pope dies? The first thing that happens is that the Camerlengo has to verify the death. Now, one of the things I'm going to challenge you also is to remember, these are not only old customs, these are customs that grew out of before technology. And as a matter of fact, these are customs that I would say transcends technology. Okay, and you'll see why here in a second. The Cardinal Camerlengo has the duty of going in and making sure the Pope is dead. Making sure and verifying that the Pope has truly passed away. Now think about it. If you're in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s or so, how are you going to do that? And so, once again, we want things very strict. We want to make sure he's dead before we start moving on and creating more confusion. So, the legend is that the Camerlengo comes in and he takes a small silver hammer, taps on the forehead of the Pope 3 times, calls out his baptismal name 3 times, then places a mirror underneath his nose to see if he's still breathing. And if none of that does anything, he proclaims the Pope is dead. Papa mortuus est. Okay, now, dramatic? Yes. Probably stuff of legends, though. We can't verify that that ever happened. Okay, a lot of times people say, oh, yeah, that happened. I can't find anything. If you can find something, I'd be happy to know. This seems to be more wives' tale than anything. So they verified it how they verified it. Nowadays, we don't have to worry about it because we call medical examiners to come in to make sure, hey, is the Pope dead or not? And so the medical examiners will examine the Pope, and then the Camerlengo still has to be the one that calls it. Once he calls it, Papa mortuus est, the Pope is dead, that's when the Sede vacante starts. Okay, that's when everything starts kicking in. Nothing starts, that's why the Camerlengo is so important. His decision kicks things off. Okay? Now, UDG is also very clear that for this verification, there's to be no pictures, no film recordings. The Camerlengo can allow 1 or 2 pictures, very limited pictures for historical reasons, but that's it. You'll never see a picture of them verifying the death of a pope. It just simply doesn't exist. Okay? If the Camerlengo allows for historical purposes, a picture or something like that, the Pope has to be dressed in vestments, in red vestments. He can't just be, in his gown or something like that. He has to be dressed in red vestments. Again, that's something that is of law because we want to protect the dignity of the office there. So then, the vicar of the city of Rome, in other words, the guy who's the vicar for the Pope, who runs the Diocese of Rome on behalf of the Pope, he's the one that is informed immediately by the Camerlengo, and then he's the one that informs everybody else. Once again, I think this time it didn't quite happen. I think the Camerlengo went ahead and acknowledged it and went and told everybody. What happens next then is that it kicks off all kinds of things. The first thing, the bronze doors of St. Peter's are sealed. So until there's a new pope, those doors are going to be closed and sealed. The bell in St. Peter's Square, that Arco della Campani, is rung. That's the death knell that's talked about a lot. The Camerlengo then also informs the dean of the College of Cardinals. Why? Because, hey, you got to get these cardinals together. Remember, the dean is the head of the body of cardinals. You got to get all these guys into Rome because we got to kick this off. The deans then notifies all the cardinals. They start coming to Rome, which immediately happened already. He notifies what's called the diplomatic corps. The diplomatic corps are those political entities, ambassadors and things like that. He lets all of them know as well. Then the flags are lowered at half-mast. This is very regimented and very strict on how these things have to work. Okay. Yeah. And then the Camerlengo, in a ceremony, seals the papal apartments. So where the Pope was living, the Camerlengo has to go and seal it. Why do we seal the apartments? Once again, the church has done this for a while. We don't want anybody snooping in there. We don't want any sort of person going in there. The next pope is going to deal with that. So we have to seal the apartments. Now it's become, with modern technology, it's become more ceremonial, but the idea is still there. We want that sort of security to happen. So this happened just a few days ago there when Cardinal Farrell sealed the papal apartments on there. I was disappointed that the ribbon was so small. I mean, it's not like a big dramatic. You got to seal it. But he uses the small ones, so perfectly fine, perfectly fine. This is why I'm not a cardinal. So, then there's the ceremony of the destruction of the fisherman's ring. Okay, once again, this came from an era where the Pope's ring was used to authenticate true correspondences. The wax seal was there. Why do you have to destroy it? We don't want any forgeries. We don't want anybody picking up on it and creating documents that are supposedly from the Pope. See, it's sealed in his ring. No. So we got to go in there, we got to destroy this ring so that nobody can take advantage of it. So again, over the years, it's become more ceremonial and things like that, but it's an actual ceremony for the destruction of the pescatorio, the fisherman's ring. The ring is called the fisherman's ring because it usually has an image of St. Peter fishing on it. And then around it, it's sometimes they wear it, mostly it's ceremonial, but sometimes they wear it. Around the edges is the name of the Pope on there, and then with the picture of St. Peter fishing, hence the fisherman's ring, the escatorio that's going there. So we want that destroyed because it's also the symbol of his power, the symbol of his jurisdiction. Now that Papa Mortuus Est, the Pope, is dead, the authority has stopped. And so that symbolic destruction of that ring kind of manifests that as well. Once again, we live in ritual. We express the sorrow and this reality in ritual. And so there's actually a way, there's certain persons that can be there and certain persons who can't. It's very regimented. Who's going to be there? It's a very small group. The ring is inspected by all, and then the camerlengo is given a tool where he defaces the ring, and then either a hammer to break it. Nowadays, they kind of have this little snipping thing that they snip it into small parts so that you can't use it to seal anything anymore. Very dramatic, very dramatic. The ring that is smashed, that's going to be buried with the Pope. It's one of the items that's going to be put into the casket with the Pope later on. The body of the Pope. It is forbidden for a Pope to have an autopsy. So there's never going to be an autopsy on the Pope, and there's no embalming either of a Pope. Well, that's going to be a problem very quickly, right? That's why they have these things called the formalin. Formalin is kind of a cream. That's why when you see John Paul II or Benedict or now Francis, if you look at it, they don't look quite right. It's because there's no embalming. It's that cream that's on there. It's a very artificial look that's on there because, again, the respect for the body, we're not going to tamper with his body. We're not going to embalm. We're not going to do autopsy. The formalin is used and that's it. The Signoracci funeral home is the one that has the honor for years and years and years now of being the funeral home that takes care of this. The Pope's body is dressed in red. Red is the symbol of blood, once again. He's spilling his blood, martyr, but it's also the color of papal mourning. So you're going to see a lot of red because the cardinals are wearing red, but then also like for the funeral and things like that, you're going to see the red vestments because that's the color of mourning for the passing of a pope. There's an ancient kind of phrase, Papa lucet in rubio, the Pope lies in red. Lies in red, beautiful. He's also usually dressed with the pallium. The pallium is that thing that the archbishops wear. It's usually over there. It's a white wool thing with crosses on it. That's the symbol of an archbishop. So when you see Cardinal and Mass and things like that, who wear the pallium sometimes, that's given to archbishops when they take over an archdiocese on there. And then the mitre and the pectoral cross, of course. All right, going on then. What just happened earlier today was what's called the rite of translation of the body. Translation just means the movement of the body. And that happened early. As a matter of fact, last night I was up late working on this talk, and I pulled it up. Oh, there's great pictures of the translation of the body as we were going through it. It's very surreal. Here are pictures from this morning in Rome, where they moved the body from Santa Marta over to St. Peter's Basilica. There's a whole rite that goes with that, where the Pope is going to lay in state. The term for that is the translation of the body over. And so, once again, very dramatic things going on as we speak. The papal funeral, then. Let's look at the papal funeral rites. The funeral rites are required to be done 4 to 6 days from the death of the Pope, not least of which for the reason that you don't have any sort of embalming that's going on. So we got to get on with this. We got to move on with this. He's going to lay in state. That gives people time to come, the arrangements to be made, and things like that. But we got 4 to 6 days to do it. So the general congregation, when they met last Tuesday, they decided it's going to be this Saturday at 10 a.m. Rome time, which is 3 a.m. our time. Yeah. I'll watch the rebroadcast. So the rite then starts with this rite of placing in the casket. Traditionally speaking, the popes are encased in a triple casket, 3 caskets. Okay, the first casket is a cypress casket. In other words, a simple wood. A simple wood. Tombs or caskets of popes are not elaborate. You'll see that they're very, very simple. That's by design, because we don't want popes to have these elaborate caskets on there. It's in the legislation. You have to use a simple wooden casket. It's usually made out of cypress. There's a whole list of people who can be there at the translating or the placing of the casket into this. There's items that need to be placed in there. It's a whole ceremony of what we put in the casket. The first thing that's put in the casket is what's called a rogitum or rogitum. The rogitum is a scroll that has the major accomplishments of the Pope on there, like big things that are kind of landmarks of his papacy that's there. It's kind of a time capsule, really, is what it is. Also, once again, the church thinks it's centuries, in millennia even. We're accustomed, we have all the technology, but what if technology collapses? What if we go into some sort of apocalyptic era or something like that? We'll still have those time capsules there. So it's kind of that idea of a time capsule. So all of that rogitum is read by the master of ceremonies. It's rolled up during that time. Psalm 42 is sung. That's the sicut cervus desiderata fontes, like a deer that yearns for a running stream, so my soul is thirsting for the living God. One of my favorite songs, beautiful, beautiful song that's there. So it's all wrapped in liturgical ceremonies, it's all wrapped in worship, it's all wrapped in prayer. The other thing that happens is they place the white veils. There's 2 white veils that are placed on the body. The first one over the face, the other one over the hands, covering the face of the Pope, covering the hands of the Pope. Then, I didn't have a picture of it, but there's a red velvet pouch that's put in there as well. In that pouch is the coins. The coins. Every Pope, whenever there's a Pope, there's commemorative coins that are done. They take 2 of those that are representative, and they put it in the pouch there in order to, again, it's a time capsule to commemorate. And it's an ancient custom where we did that with emperors and stuff like that. Again, we're very Roman in that sense, that those coins signify a time stamp as well for it, because it's during this time, it's during that time. So now it's ceremonial with that. The last will and testament of the Pope is also put in there. It's read, and then it's put in there as well. There's a copy then that's put into the archives. While that's done, Psalm 41 is sung. Beautiful. Pope Francis, in his last will and testimony, had a few things in there. Very interesting, very unusual. He didn't want anything inscribed on his coffin except the word Franciscus. That's it. Not Pope, not dates or anything, just the word Franciscus on there. And I think they're going to honor that and just put Franciscus on his tomb. Once that happens, they move over to the funeral mass. So once again, the funeral mass is Saturday, 10 o'clock Rome time, 3 a.m. our time. The main celebrant, by law, by designation, is the Dean of the College of Cardinals. And yes, Cardinal Battista Re, the 91-year-old, he's going to celebrate. So you're going to see a 91-year-old cardinal, the head of the Dean of the College of Cardinals. He's accepted to celebrate that. Red vestments are worn also. And that's actually Francis there. So that's a picture of him there. Burial then. The burial is presided over by the Camerlengo. Camerlengo's a very busy guy these days. He has to preside. There's a whole rite of burial. The liturgical rite also, but all these extra things that you have to do for the Pope. What happens is that casket is placed into 2 more caskets. The first one that it's placed in is the cypress one, the simple wood. Then it's put into a metal case. The idea of the metal case is just to keep it. In other words, so it doesn't disintegrate, things like that. So it's kind of like the vault that we would have of stone and things like that. So it's a metal case that's there. That metal case then is put into another one made of elm, usually, or oak, or some other nice wood or something like that. But it's still very simple in design. Pope Francis in his last will and testimony said, I don't want the other two. So he's only going to do the cypress wood, which is there, which is really interesting because those time capsules are probably not going to last very long in there. But I think they're going to honor that, so they're just going to bury him in a single casket as opposed to the triple casket. The Holy Queen is prayed, and then everything has to be notarized, the burial has to be notarized, and things like that. The vicar for Vatican City, in other words, the vicar for the Diocese of Rome, appears again. He gets the honor of giving the last blessing to the Pope. Why would that be? It's logical because he's the one that serves the Diocese of Rome on behalf of the Pope. And so he's the one that gets to do the last farewell, in other words. It's a beautiful situation. Burial is usually done in St. Peter's, underneath the high altar there. That's where popes are usually buried. Pope Francis, once again, in his last will and testament, said, I don't want to be buried there. I want to be buried at St. Mary Major, the Basilica of St. Mary Major, because he has a wonderful devotion to Our Lady Protectress of Rome. Whenever he does an international trip, before he goes, he places flowers at the altar of Our Lady Protectress of Rome. Every time he comes back from an international trip, he places flowers in front of the same altar. When he came out of the hospital last week, or a few weeks ago, he placed flowers at the same. So he had this great devotion to Our Lady Protectress of Rome. He said he wants to be buried in St. Mary Major. So his tomb is going to be over in St. Mary Major and not in the basement of in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica. Once the funeral happens, the day of the funeral kicks off what we call the Novum Dialis. The Novum Dialis, and you can see the word 9 days in there. Novum being 9, Dialis, DS, day. Novum Dialis is a 9-day mourning period for the Pope. Every day there's going to be masses said, both there. Dioceses are encouraged, priests are encouraged to celebrate Mass in unity with the Novum Dialis on there. Intense spiritual preparation, but also there's a logic that the Church has there. We don't want to rush the conclave just yet. Everybody's itching to get to the conclave. We want a period of mourning. We want a transition. We want a kind of a clearing of the mind, returning to prayer. It's a spiritual. It's also that notion of the novena that's going on, the 9 days, that waiting from the Ascension to Pentecost Sunday, the novenas that we do in our spiritual lives, that 9-day period to transition over there. So the conclave can't start until after the Novum Dialis then. One of the other things that's customary, not required, but customary is what's called bunting. Oh, I love the bunting. Bunting is when, during the Novum Dialis, during the period of mourning, a black drape is put over usually the church doors and things like that. The co-cathedral is already done. If you go down to the co-cathedral, you'll see 2 big black drapes that are already there. Here at UST, we're going to be doing bunting. So we're going to have bunting over Linkley. As a matter of fact, if you drive off of Montrose there, in front of Linkley, Montrose, we're going to be putting that. We're waiting for it to be shipped. But once it gets here, we're going to put it up there so people can see as they're driving by. We're also going to put it over the entrance of Nguyen, over the dorm, so that we keep that notion of the Novum Dialis in the morning for the Pope and prayers for the Pope that's going on. We're also going to have it over the chapel doors here, so as people enter into the chapel doors, they'll see the bunting, and then also in Crooker Center, right in front of our student activities and campus ministry, we'll have the bunting over there as well. The bunting, again, it's customary, it's not required, but it's a sign of mourning. It's a sign of kind of transitioning in our minds and praying for the Pope. Once a new Pope is elected, the bunting switches over to yellow and white. So we're going to have in the same places here on campus a switch over to the yellow and white to celebrate the election of the new Pope as well. And you'll see that in churches. You'll see that probably at the co-cathedral as well. All right, so I don't know where Stanley Tucci and Ray Fiennes are, but let's talk about the conclave. The conclave, choosing a pope. Choosing a pope, very, very, the church knows this is hairy stuff. This can be tense stuff. This can be confusing stuff. This can be tense. So the church is going to lay out some very, very strict rules on how we do this. Now, again, what we're looking at is the way that it looks now. Different periods of history have done it in different ways, and that's perfectly fine. There's no set. Jesus didn't say this is how you choose a pope. That's fine. We chose a replacement for Judas by rolling dice in Acts of the Apostles in Acts 2. So, does the Holy Spirit show up? Yeah, he seems to show up. So these things can change. These are laws, but this is how we want it strictly done so that we can avoid all of that. Interesting side tidbit. Of conclave stories, my favorite has to come from the year 1059. In 1059, Pope Nicholas II passed away, and what happened was that in 1268, Clement IV passed away in a town called Viterbo in Italy, and so the cardinals gathered there for the conclave. And again, it doesn't have to be at St. Peter's. As a matter of fact, 1268 was before the basilica was built. The old basilica was there. And so they gathered, and they kind of had a great time gathering there. So they had parties, and they hung out. The Sede vacante went on for 2 years and 9 months because they wouldn't get their act together and elect a pope. What happened was that the lay people got so frustrated at this that they came along and they sealed the doors with cement, and they ripped the roof off so that it exposed them to the elements. All of a sudden, they elected a pope in a few days. Bam! It was done. That's lay power, if you will. So that's one of my favorite conclave stories. So conclaves can be really messy. That's one of those historical things. I checked. Statistically, again, nerd fact here, of the last 11 conclaves going back to 1846, none of them lasted more than 4 days. So more than likely, once the conclave starts, if keeping with statistics and keeping with trends, we'll probably have a pope within 3-4 days. That's my guess. Now, it could be an unusual one. We may have to rip the roof off of the Sistine Chapel, but we'll see what happens. So, conclave, with the key, locking them in. Once they're locked in, they're locked in. This is a very confidential, and we want to place the emphasis on there. Why does the church do this? Just to be secretive and things like that? No, the church doesn't want things to be messed up. We don't want this process to be abused. We don't want this process to be taken advantage of. And so the reason we do this is so that we want a clear procedure that's just, that's right, that allows grace and allows the Holy Spirit to function. So, the cardinals come. They used to have to live in makeshift cots and things like that, because the idea was that you're not supposed to be very comfortable. You want to get moving. We don't want another 2-year Sede vacante like we had before. And so, yeah, in the old days, what happened was that they had to set up cots in the hallway of the Apostolic Palace and Sistine Chapel and things like that. And you have 90-year-old cardinals who have to lay on a cot and wash in a basin that's there. Why? We want you to get on with it. We don't want you to mess around and be too comfortable. We want you to move on. So that's the idea. John Paul II came along and said, it's kind of intense, guys. And so he built Casa Santa Marta, which is it's kind of a hotel right now. That's actually where Pope Francis ended up living. He didn't live in the papal apartments. He lived in the Casa. So the Casa is right off of St. Peter's Basilica there. And so that's what's housing the cardinals now as they come. When the conclave starts, that gets locked down. Locked down like crazy. Obviously there's sweeps and the electronic sweeps, security, Swiss guards are working on all of that. They enter, and so they stay at the Domus there, and there's specific rules about what happens and what doesn't happen, because one of the unusual thing about the Domus is that it's on the other side of St. Peter's Basilica from the Sistine Chapel. So it's a little bit of a hike to get over there, and the church says, well, let's make sure that we get this very strictly, because a lot can happen in that walk over there. So there's very strict rules on how they're transported back and forth as well. Who can enter the conclave? First and foremost, the cardinal electors. If you're under 80, at least by the day before the Pope dies, you can enter the conclave. There are other positions that are very set on who can enter and at what time those other ones have to leave. So, for example, there's going to be 2 doctors there, just in case. But at a certain point, they have to leave. But they're there just in case there's emergencies. There's a select number of priests to hear confessions. It's a spiritual thing as well. It's a spiritual experience as well. At a certain point, they have to leave. Of course, the sacristans, there's 2 master of ceremonies that are there. They have to leave at a certain point as well. So the Sistine Chapel, the Domus Santa Marta, they're swept. Security is heavy. The cardinal electors are forbidden to have any sort of interaction with the outside world. Leave your cell phone at the door, no emails, no things like that. It's a lockdown that's there. The conclave proper has to begin within no sooner than 15, no later than 20 days from the death of a pope. So canon law nerds like me, when I heard the pope died, I ran to my calendar and started to count the days. And if you count the days, my guess, by the time we get to day 15, that's going to be May 5th. May 5th. So more than likely, my guess is that the conclave is going to start either May 5th or May 6th, right there. Because that's the 15th day. It can really start within that week, though, up to 20 days after the death. Starts with the cardinals gathering in St. Peter's for Mass. The Mass is called the Missa pro elegendo Papa, the Mass for the election of a pope. The cardinals then convene. They start going over to the Sistine Chapel, which is they'll do the march over to the Sistine Chapel. Once they get over there, they're singing the Veni Creator and things like that, and you'll see that procession of the cardinals. It's really dramatic. It's a really fantastic moment. So if you're up early, usually it's pretty early because they start in the morning, which for us again is the middle of the night. But you'll see this wonderful procession in the Vatican choir, the Sistine Chapel choir singing the Veni Creator. It's amazing. Once that happens, once they all come in, take their seats, the papal master of ceremonies proclaims extra omnes, which in my humble translation is, everybody get out. Okay? That's my, Dr. Bowler's not here to correct my Latin, but that's what the Latin says. Everybody get out of here. It's extra omnes, everybody out. So they start to seal in. Now, there's still a few people that are going to be dismissed a little bit later on, but this is where all the extra doctors have to leave and all those other people start having to leave because we're beginning to make preparations for it. The cardinals then start by taking an oath. There's a taking an oath, and the oath is actually printed in UDG. So there's a big section in there where they read together. It's a prayer service. They start with a prayer service, and they read that, and then at the end of that, they sit down and they one by one go up and take the oath individually. So the gospel is laid out there, and that's what it is. They're in the Sistine Chapel there. The gospel is laid out. Each one of them have to go up, put their hands on the gospel, and pretty much say, I, and I, why does it start with and? Because it's the last part of the oath. The first part, they all talk together. The last one, and I, Ben Cardinal Nguyen, do so promise, pledge, and swear, placing my hands on the gospel, so help me God in these holy gospels which I touch with my hand. Okay, now, in years past, in other conclaves, recent conclaves, they've actually had the camera on there. They haven't turned the cameras off yet. So you'll see one by one the cardinals going up, and they do it in Latin, because you have to do it in Latin. And they do this oath that's there. It's also a really interesting reason why they do that. This is my guess, is that one of those guys is going to walk out as a pope. So it's going to be really interesting to see them going up, and they did that with, again with Benedict, and then with Pope Francis as well, seeing them swear the oath as a cardinal. So that later on, but after that, they start turning the cameras off. So then we're not done with the spiritual stuff yet. There's a cleric that's predetermined by the general congregation to give a spiritual reflection on there. The reflection cannot be trying to sway anybody. The reflection is not a political lobbying or anything like that. It has to be truly a spiritual reflection. You're trying to help the cardinals be more in communion with God, being aware of the Holy Spirit. That's the idea. So it's going to be interesting to see who they choose to give the meditation there. The cardinals then are not done praying yet. There's a lot of prayer that goes on. They pray together for the election of a pope, and then the ballots start getting distributed. So now we start moving into phase one. Phase one is what we call the pre-scrutiny. This is where we lawyers and canon lawyers just nerd out, like, oh, here's the procedure that does it. The pre-scrutiny phase is when the ballots are starting to be distributed. So everybody sits down in their assigned places. The ballots are passed out. On the ballot are the words "Eligo in summum pontificem," which translates to "I elect to be or as the supreme pontiff," and then there's a blank there for them to write the name in there. So each one is given the ballots. Then he's given like a little pad to keep tally, because we want everybody to keep tally, because we don't want any hanky-panky going on. We don't want any cheating, things like that. It's a very open process in that sense. As they're doing that, they actually cast lots. They roll dice to choose 3 guys to be scrutineers. Scrutineers are the counters. In other words, this is not predetermined. We're going to leave this to chance. We're going to leave this to the Holy Spirit. We're going to roll dice to see who the 3 guys are going to be to count this. So they roll dice. The 3 persons are selected. The master of ceremonies then goes and exits. At this point, his job is done. He leaves. Each cardinal then, once the voting commences, each cardinal writes down the name and he folds it twice. So if you've seen the movie, that's fairly accurate the way that they do it. You have to fold it twice, and then you have to take it, each one in order of precedence, according to the order of cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, cardinal deacons. They each one by one come up and they hold the ballot, fold it twice, walk over to the plate, a little chalice sometimes, depending on what receptacle they use. They put it on there, and while they're doing that, they have to pray a prayer. I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected. Okay, now, mind you also, as they're doing this, they're looking at the Last Judgment that Michelangelo painted. So that's why they have it in there, is because, this is serious stuff. We don't want politicking. We don't want just, trying to sway the process. We want honest opinions and honest votes to go on here. So then what happens is that the first scrutineer shakes up the urn on there, because it's put on the plate. They distribute it in there. It goes into the urn. He shakes it all up. The second scrutineer takes out the ballot one by one in full view. It's not behind the curtain or anything. It's in full view that he has to pick. So all the cardinals are sitting there. The second scrutineer, as he's taking them out, they start to count it. So the first thing they do is they count it to make sure the numbers match up. If the number is off even by 1, they take the whole thing and burn it. And they do it again. So it has to be exactly precise on there. So it has to be legit. Then, if it is legit, the counting starts. There it goes. Notes the name, scrutineer, number 2. And so we don't have to go through all this. It's a very intense process, if you notice. It takes a long time. That's why they only do 2 in the morning and 2 at night. So usually on the first day, they do just 1 ballot. And then starting on the second day, they do 2 ballots in the morning, 2 ballots in the afternoon, because this takes a while. Especially we have, this year, 135 cardinals that you have to get through. That's a lot. It's a lot of praying also, so you're sitting there waiting a lot of times. And there's no phone, you can't check your email or anything like that. So you should be praying. So the counting of the ballots starts to happen. Once it happens, the third scrutineer is the one that calls out the name. And as he's calling out the name, everybody is keeping the tally on there, because we want everybody to start telling so they can kind of see where this is going. Once that's done, real interesting tradition that happens. Once the vote is done, the third scrutineer takes a needle with the thread on it, and he pokes it through the ballot, right through the word eligo, I elect. So that at the end, there's 135, should be 120, but 135 this time, ballots that are there, and they take that and they put it on the table. Then they start recording the ballot, and then they're starting to look at it. The count comes back, 2/3 is required. You have to have supermajority. It's not 50%, it's 2/3 majority. Because again, we want this to be clear. We want this to be supermajority that's going on. The revisers, there's 2 revisers that check the ballots and the notes just to check their counting and everything. So it's almost like double, triple check there that's going on. If it's the last ballot of the day, we all know, if there's nobody, they just go to the second vote. If after the second vote or the last ballot of the day, nobody's elected, they take it, and they used to put a certain type of straw in there. Now there's some chemicals that they throw in there that creates the black smoke. That's the chimney for the Sistine Chapel. What we are trying to do here at UST is to get the chimney cam. There's this thing where you can put it 24 hours a day on there, so it's like all monitoring and everything like that. So we're going to put that on all of our screens here at UST, just so that we can monitor it with the chimney cam. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. I think it was during the election of Pope Benedict that one time the smoke came out, and I don't know what happened, but they're like, is that black or white? I'm not sure. It's kind of this grayish thing. It's like, do we have a pope or not? We can't tell. And somebody, actually, they admitted later on, like they used the wrong formula or something like that. It came out gray. It was like, you're driving us nuts here. You're killing us. So the ballots are then, black smoke. Then we got to keep going. If after 3 days, so they do this day in and day out for 3 days. If after 3 days, no pope, they take a day break because it's like, okay, we're not getting anywhere. Let's take a break. What do we have to do during this? Well, we want to take a break so we can pray, so we can reflect, and we can have some informal conversations that's going on. Because obviously we need to talk, we need to pray more, we need to reflect more. And that's exactly what happens. Then there's a spiritual conference by Cardinal Mamberti on here, the spiritual reflection, because he's the head of the Cardinal Deans now. Remember, it was Cardinal Ray, but since he's 91, he's not in the conclave. So Mamberti is going to be the one that's giving the reflection there. Again, that reflection is not to lobby, it's basically to get the cardinals to reflect more. How are we going to get past this impasse that's going on? Voting then resumes for 7 more rounds. If by the end of 7 rounds you still don't have anybody, they take another break. Then they go another 7 rounds. And they basically keep going. John Paul II said, well, what if we get into a situation where we can't go forward? So John Paul said, hey, after the 14 rounds, basically, if we didn't get to a 2/3 majority, the cardinals can then vote by 2/3 majority to go to a simple majority instead of a 2/3 vote. So that was kind of John Paul's way of fixing that. Now, it never got there, obviously, because it was for after he died. Pope Benedict comes along after his conclave, and he said, no, we're going to change that. This is one of the changes that Pope Benedict did. Pope Benedict said, no, the way we're going to do it is we're going to go for 13 days. And if by the end of 13 days we don't have a pope, we take the 2 top candidates from the last vote, and we have a runoff election with those 2. But you still need 2/3 vote for those 2. Okay? So that's where it stands today. So John Paul's way of dealing with it, that's out. Pope Benedict's way of dealing with it, that's the current law. So usually it'll go 3-4 days, but if it goes 13 days, then we may have a runoff election with the 2 top candidates. Are we ever going to know? Probably not. It's just speculation. If they're in there for 10 days, 13 days, and then all of a sudden a guy comes out, that they probably instituted Pope Benedict's reforms on there. All right. Going forward, here's Benedict's 2/3. The announcement. Now the excitement is starting. If somebody does get the 2/3 vote, what happens then is that the dean of the college, again, the dean of the college set a position there. He has to go up to the guy, and he has to ask him, not in his own words. He has to say, "Do you accept your canonical election as supreme pontiff?" Okay, very set thing that he has to say. The guy can say yes or no. You don't have to accept. If the guy says no, then obviously we go back to the voting, and it starts all over again. If the guy says yes, then the dean of the college immediately asks him, "By what name do you wish to be called?" Okay, so in the old days, they don't do it anymore, but in the old days, they used to have a canopy over each one of the cardinal electors. And the dramatic thing is that when the guy accepts, the canopies all get taken down until there's one canopy left. And while that's happening, that's when he's thinking, what name I need to be thinking of? How do I want to be referred to? It's a very emotional process. We don't have canopies anymore, especially now with 135 guys in there. I don't know how they're going to get them all in there. But if the guy says yes, then he proclaims his name. The interesting thing about the name change also, the name change actually started with Pope John II in the year 533, because his given name, his birth name was Mercury, pagan god. So he thought, oh my gosh, I can't be Pope Mercury. That's a little distasteful. So I'm going to change it to Pope John II. So that started the tradition of the name change. And so by the 900s, they were regularly doing it because it's kind of a nod also to the office, is that it's not my person. I'm not the Pope. I'm occupying the office. And so, in a sense, my personality decreases, the Pope's personality, then the office increases as there. So that's where the tradition comes on. It's kind of a neat thing as well. So the ballots then are taken and burnt into with some other chemicals to get the white smoke. So that's when the chimney cam. If you are in Rome, this is when you just forget your cappuccino and run to St. Peter's Basilica. Okay, this is about to happen. There's going to be an announcement pretty soon. This is when people are going crazy and things like that. Our chimney cam will go crazy. It's going to be pretty exciting, except for the guy. The guy is taken into this room that they call the room of tears, because this is his moment to pick out the regalia that he's going to appear on the balcony with, and they have certain set sizes in there, which is really interesting. I had a friend who was also he was a liturgy nerd, and he said, "Do you know what sizes they have for the room of tears?" I'm like, "How do you even know that?" He's like, "Well, I kind of know a guy who knew a guy who took care of that," and he said that they have 3 sizes in there. That's why when the Pope comes out, sometimes it doesn't quite fit on him. I'm like, "Yeah, I never noticed that, but you're right. It's always kind of a little odd, a little unusual because of the sizes." He said, "Yeah, but the sizes are this. The first size is small. The second size is portly small. And the third size is portly big." That's the only 3 sizes you had to choose from. So I'm like, all right, so that apparently is in the room of tears. Why do they call it the room of tears? Because the guy goes in there by himself so he can get changed. And this is where most guys freak out. That's why they call it the room of tears, because then all of a sudden this is the first moment you've had by yourself, and it's beginning to hit. So the nickname of this room as he's getting ready is the room of tears, because a lot of guys just break down in the room of tears. So after that, so he gets one of the 3 nice sizes there, and he comes back out ready to, and when he comes out, the other cardinals start coming up and congratulating him one by one. So it's an internal thing that's going on. Then we get to the fantastic announcement. The announcement happens at the central loggia or balcony of St. Peter's Basilica there. Who gets to do it? It's the senior cardinal deacon. The senior cardinal deacon is the one that gets to do that. Again, Re is 91 years old. It's falling to Mamberti, so he's going to be the one that gets the honor of announcing it. And it's a set announcement. He has to say this. He has to say this. The words that people know so much, Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. I announce to you a great joy, the great habemus papam. We have a pope. We have a pope. Yeah, people go crazy. And then the interesting thing, eminentissimum ac reverendissimum dominum, the most eminent and reverend Lord. Now it's translated as Lord. In Latin, the word dominum, obviously dominus is Lord, but it could also mean sir, Mr. It's a term of respect for a man. So we just don't have an English word that's neutral enough on there. So they use dominum for that term of respect. Very similar to the English sir. The most eminent and reverend Lord or sir, and then his first name. And that little pause there is great, because that's when all the journalists start checking their charts to see who has this first name on there. I have to admit, when a lot of people hadn't heard of Jorge Bergoglio at the time. And if you remember, Cardinal Turin was the one that did the announcement then. And Cardinal Turin, I think he had a stroke or something, so his speech wasn't as clear. And so he said, Jorge. And people were like, who? We didn't know who that was. So people were trying to look through who's Jorge going on here. So then he clarifies the Sancte Romane Ecclesia Cardinalem, Cardinal of the Holy Roman Church, because that's the title with the last name. And when he announces the last name, that becomes the sure thing. Oh, that's the guy that we're talking about. And then he announces his papal name, Qui simi nomen imposuit, who has chosen the name for himself of, and then whatever the name is that he's chosen. The Pope comes out then and gives what's called the Urbi et Orbi blessing. Urbi et Orbi is Latin for to the city and to the world. The city is the city of Rome. Why? Because he's the Bishop of Rome. He's going to give the blessing first to his flock in Rome, but then he's also the universal pastor, so he's going to give the blessing to the world. This is addressed to the city and to the world. It's a set blessing that's done in Latin because it's universal that's going on. John Paul II and other popes started to break with that tradition, and they started to give like a little address to it. Really interesting, particularly with John Paul, because John Paul II was the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. So it was a shock to them. So all of a sudden you had a Polish pope coming out to the loggia, which people are like, oh my gosh, this is history. And then what does he do? The great actor in him addresses the Diocese of Rome in perfect Italian. So I think that's why he's like kidding around with them and stuff like that. And so he kind of started that. Pope Benedict carried that on too. Pope Francis did the same thing. So we'll see how technically, you're not supposed to do that, but hey, you're the Pope, you can do what you want now. Technically, you're supposed to just give the Urbi et Orbi blessing. It's set, say that for your homily later on, but it's kind of nice that they do a little bit of an address there as well. So then, what happens after that is that there is the papal inaugural mass that happens soon after that. So we have a little bit of time for questions. If anybody wants to do a question or two, so we'll start here.
Is it all done in Latin?
Most of it is.